In the year 1315 Morgarten, deep in the heart of the Swiss mountains, one of the most powerful noble houses in Europe made a catastrophic mistake. The House of Habsburg, rulers of vast territories, commanders of thousands of armored knights, and architects of dynasties that would shape European history for centuries, marched their elite army into a narrow mountain pass expecting an easy victory. What happened next would shock the entire continent. Within hours, their unstoppable force was shattered, their knights drowning in a lake, their formations crushed by rocks and logs, their reputation obliterated by a group of mountain farmers who had no right to win. This is the story of Morgarten, where 2,000 militiamen from 3 tiny valleys executed the perfect ambush and changed the course of history forever. Let's set the scene. It's the early 14th century, and central Switzerland isn't even a country yet. It's just a collection of rugged valleys, narrow passes, and small rural communities scattered across some of the most unforgiving terrain in Europe. The 3 main valleys, Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, are home to people who appear poor by the standards of European nobility. But here's the thing, they're sitting on something incredibly valuable. These valleys control the alpine passes, the roads that connect northern Europe to Italy, the trade routes that make kingdoms rich. For generations, these mountain communities had governed themselves, chosen their own judges, regulated their own tolls, and answered directly to the Holy Roman Emperor, not to any local lord. That was the deal. That was the tradition. And that was what kept them free. But the House of Habsburg saw things differently. The Habsburgs were wealthy, well-connected, and militarily feared across the region. They controlled modern-day Austria and surrounding territories. And in their view, the mountain valleys near their borders were an error in the system. These lands should answer to them. The roads should pay tolls to them. The judges should be appointed by them. The valleys disagreed. They had lived free for generations, and no lord, no matter how powerful, had the right to rule them. But the Habsburgs weren't asking. They started sending officials into the valleys, challenging local court decisions, questioning land ownership, pushing back against old privileges. Each step was small, each move seemingly legal, but the mountain people knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't administration. This was occupation. The breaking point came with a dispute involving the Valley of Schwyz and the Abbey of Einsiedeln, which was backed by Habsburg interests. On the surface, it was about land and legal authority. In reality, it was about who had the right to rule. The Habsburgs declared the mountain communities lawless, disobedient, a threat to order and stability. It was the perfect excuse to do what they'd wanted all along: send in the army and crush the resistance before it could fully form. And so Duke Leopold I of Austria assembled his forces and prepared to march. This wasn't just any army. The Habsburg force was designed to impress before it ever fought. Armored knights in full equipment, war horses bred for battle, banners flying, armor shining in the sunlight. This was a force built to look unstoppable, to remind everyone watching who held the real power. Leopold's plan was direct and confident. March through the mountain routes, enter the valleys, break the resistance, and establish control. He expected submission, not battle. Why would he expect anything else? These were farmers and herders, not professional soldiers. They had no helmets, no titles, no ornate armor. How could they possibly stand against the might of Habsburg cavalry? But the mountain people knew something Leopold didn't. They couldn't win on open ground. They couldn't match armor with armor or cavalry with cavalry. But they knew the mountains like no outsider ever could. They knew where the roads narrowed, where horses lost their strength, where a marching column became vulnerable. And so they made a decision that would echo through history. They would choose the battlefield, and they would turn the mountains themselves into a weapon. As the Habsburg army began its march, it was a sight to behold. Several thousand men, hundreds of horses, knights in gleaming armor at the front, foot soldiers and support troops stretching far down the road. The column was powerful but stretched, long and heavy and difficult to turn. The banners were raised, the armor reflected the light, and the sound of metal and hoofs filled the valley. This army was meant to be seen, not hidden. Leopold intended to move quickly, arrive as an irresistible force, and show the mountain communities that resistance was futile. Meanwhile, the defenders were gathering. Men from Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden moved quietly through the forests in small groups, using paths only they knew, led by commanders chosen for experience rather than rank. They had studied the routes for days, walked the roads, watched where horses slowed on uneven ground. They chose their killing ground carefully, a narrow stretch near Lake Ageri, where the road was trapped between water and rising slope, where a wide formation was impossible, where a long column couldn't turn or redeploy. And they prepared their trap with ruthless efficiency. At the highest points above the road, strong men positioned heavy stones and logs, loosened and ready to fall. Closer to the road, fighters with halberds and spears waited with clear instructions. Pull the riders down, stop the forward movement, keep the fallen from standing. Further along the slope, reserve groups prepared to close the corridor once the attack began, to block escape and prevent regrouping. Every man knew where to stand and when to act. No one would move without the signal. Timing mattered more than numbers, and they would wait until the Habsburg column was fully committed, until turning back was just as dangerous as moving forward. Late that morning, the Habsburg army reached the most dangerous part of the route. The road ran tightly between the lake and the mountain slope, with no open space, no field to deploy. Leopold saw the narrow road but didn't slow. He viewed it as difficult terrain, not hostile ground. The army continued exactly as planned, and the column began to compress. Knights were forced into 1 or 2 men across at the narrowest points. Infantry, mounted retainers, and supply troops piled in tightly behind them. The column stretched far back, but became thick and heavy near the lake. Men were close enough to touch each other. Horses walked carefully with heads low. Armor scraped against armor from above. The defenders watched in silence as the entire Habsburg army locked itself into the terrain. Then came the signal. Several large rocks were released at once, falling, bouncing, shattering on the road. One smashed into the led horses. Another crashed among the infantry. A horse collapsed sideways, blocking the passage completely. Movement stopped at the front, but the rear kept pushing forward, unaware. Within seconds, the center of the column compressed violently. Shouts rose, questions not commands, and then the heavy logs began to roll. They struck shields, knocked men off balance, sent horses into panic. Several horses reared and crashed into each other, falling, and the road became completely choked. And that's when the defenders descended. They came in small, coordinated groups, not rushing wildly, but moving with clear purpose. They struck the horses first, using hooks and halberds to pull riders sideways, attacking legs instead of armor. Knights were dragged from their saddles and slammed onto the stone road. In their heavy armor, They couldn't rise. When the horses were struck, riders lost control. Animals fell, crushing men beneath them. Each fallen body became an obstacle, and each obstacle tightened the trap. Panic spread like wildfire. The front couldn't move forward. The rear kept pushing, unaware of the blockage, and the center was squeezed between them. Commands were shouted but broke apart in the noise. The sound of battle echoed between water and stone, making it impossible to tell where the danger was coming from. Knights tried to turn their horses, but there was no room. Infantry tried to pull back, but were shoved forward by the pressure from behind. The army lost its shape. What had been an organized column became a mass of isolated, desperate struggles. Some men tried to climb the slope but slipped on loose soil and roots. Others were forced sideways toward the lake. In heavy armor, balance was fragile, and several soldiers fell into the water. The weight of their gear dragged them under almost instantly. The sight was terrifying, and total panic set in. Men threw down shields, cut loose weapons, abandoned anything that might slow them. The defenders didn't chase wildly. They stayed close, kept pressure on the trapped sections of road. Their goal was collapse, not slaughter, and within minutes, the Habsburg army was no longer fighting as an army. It was a mass of individuals reacting to fear, noise, and pressure. By the time Leopold understood this was a coordinated ambush and not just a local disturbance, the damage was already done. The terrain had done its work. The march was destroyed, and Morgarten had turned from a show of power into a fight for survival. The Habsburg formation could not be restored. Remnants were scattered along the road in disconnected groups. Some were still fighting. Most were thinking about escape. The terrain offered no clear way out. Forward was blocked. The slope was unstable. The lake was deadly. Men moved without orders. Some scrambled uphill through trees, slipping and falling, their heavy armor preventing fast climbing. Others turned back along the road, forcing their way through wounded men and fallen horses. Shields were abandoned. Weapons dropped. The retreat started in the center and moved outward. Officers tried to rally small groups, shouting commands, but the terrain defeated them. There was no space to regroup, no open ground, no clear line of sight. Fear moved faster than authority. Duke Leopold understood the scale of the disaster. This wasn't a setback or temporary disruption. His army couldn't continue, couldn't turn the situation around. Remaining meant more losses. The withdrawal was made from necessity, not strategy. Signals were sent where possible. Messengers spread the order, but the retreat was already underway. It wasn't an organized withdrawal. It was a slow, painful extraction. The army reformed only after clearing the narrow ground, gathering in small, broken groups. The wounded were carried or left behind. The scale of the loss became visible. Armor abandoned on the road, broken weapons scattered everywhere. The lake surface disturbed where men and horses had disappeared. By early afternoon, the fighting stopped and the mountain grew quiet again. The defenders didn't pursue. They remained on the heights, watching the survivors retreat. They didn't chase glory or seek further bloodshed. Their objective was already achieved. The Habsburg army had been forced out. The battle ended not with a final charge or dramatic stand, but with silence. Silence broken only by the realization that one of the most powerful armies in Europe had been defeated by mountain farmers who understood where to stand, when to wait, and when to strike. News of Morgarten spread quickly across the Holy Roman Empire. A powerful Habsburg force, led by armored knights, had been crushed by mountain communities. The result shocked Europe. For centuries, heavy cavalry had been seen as unstoppable. Knights represented power, order, authority. At Morgarten, that belief collapsed. The defeat wasn't caused by inferior skill or bad luck. It was caused by terrain, preparation, and timing. Armor became a burden. Numbers became pressure. Movement became impossible. For the Habsburgs, the campaign was a failure. Their authority in the mountain regions was weakened. Future expansion had to be reconsidered. For Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, the outcome was decisive. They had defended their independence through coordinated action and discipline, not negotiation. In the years that followed, the communities strengthened their alliance, committed to mutual defense, and protected the mountain routes together. That local resistance became the foundation of what we now know as the Swiss Confederation. Morgarten is remembered not for its size, but for what it proved. That power based only on intimidation can fail, that preparation can overcome prestige, and that the landscape itself can decide history. The battlefield returned to silence. The road was used again. The lake became calm, but the lesson remained. Morgarten wasn't a story of heroic charges or legendary warriors. It was a story of understanding terrain, timing, and the courage to stand when everyone expected you to submit. And that's why, more than 700 years later, we're still talking about it.